Good morning. This morning I want to read to you from a series of wonderful little gospel commentaries written by Tom Wright in the early 2000s, and this is Mark for Everyone, and I'm reading from Mark chapter 15 and Tom Wright's notes on it. Jesus before Pilate. As soon as morning came, the chief priests held a council meeting with the elders, the lawyers, and the whole Sanhedrin. They bound Jesus, took him off to Pilate, and handed him over. "Are you the king of the Jews?" asked Pilate. "You have said so," replied Jesus. The chief priests laid many accusations against him, and Pilate again interrogated him. "Aren't you going to make any reply? Look how many things they're accusing you of." But Jesus gave no reply at all, which astonished Pilate. The custom was that at festival time he used to release for them a single prisoner, whoever they would ask for. And there was a man in prison named Barabbas, one of the revolutionaries who had committed murder during the uprising. So the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate what to do, what he normally did. "Do you want me," asked Pilate, "to release for you the king of the Jews?" He said this because he knew that the chief priests had handed him over out of envy. The chief priests stirred up the crowd to ask for Barabbas instead to be released to them. So Pilate once again asked them, "What then do you want me to do with the one you called King of the Jews?" "Crucify him," they shouted again. "Why?" asked Pilate. "What has he done wrong?" "Crucify him," they shouted all the louder. Pilate wanted to satisfy the crowd, so he released Barabbas for them. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. And what Tom Wright says about this passage is, I think, quite appropriate for the times we live in today. He says this: "Today they sell crosses in fashionable jewellery shops. If you ask the shop assistants, you will find that many of them don't know where the symbol comes from or what it means, and neither do many of their customers. It has become, ironically, a dead metaphor. Someone once remarked that if you want to wear a cross as an earring, it might be a good idea to wear an electric chair or a gallows as its pair, to remind yourself what the cross was and did and meant." The cross was a political symbol long before it became a religious symbol. Pilate knew, the crowds knew, the chief priests knew, and Jesus knew what it meant. It was the ultimate symbol of Roman power. It said, "We are in charge here, and this is what happens to people who get in our way." They had crucified thousands of rebel Jews when Jesus was a boy in Galilee. They would crucify thousands more when they took Jerusalem in AD 70. So many that they got bored and experimented with hanging people up in different positions and attitudes until they ran out of wood. And in between those two devastating repressions of revolts, they crucified lots of people for a variety of reasons, often on small pretexts. Polite Romans didn't even mention the word crucifixion or cross. The reality was brutal, ugly, and repellent. But crosses were the reality on which their empire was in fact constructed. The empire which boasted of bringing justice and peace to the whole world. Bit of an echo there, really, isn't there? Whether or not Mark was writing in Rome, as some may have thought, his hearers certainly knew all this, and we need to remember it constantly if we are to understand him at this point. Pilate feels under no obligation to hold anything approaching a fair trial. His main aim is to prevent riots, to get through the Passover season without major trouble, and, if possible, while doing so, to assert his own authority over and against the chief priests, who were always playing silly little power games against him. This wasn't a particularly bad day for Roman provincial justice. just business as usual. Business as usual. It's never going to be business as usual. Not for us, not in the world. But there will be some very positive things, I believe, coming out of this. Upending of the world's power structures. We don't want to be ruled by the mob. Violent demonstration and vandalism is criminal and should be recognised as such. But there's two images that have stuck out in my mind this week. One of Patrick Hutchinson carrying a white protester to safety, and the second of Marcus Rushford and his really level-headed argument for compassion towards those who are really, really put badly off at the bottom of the pile. Even the Labour opposition could not change Boris Johnson's mind in Parliament, because most of them too, to be fair, do come from fairly privileged backgrounds. And it is only someone like Marcus who can really get under the skin and say, this is how it was, this was what it was like. And he has, as a young man, he has really, really been a prophetic voice. And so we are seeing an upending of the world's power structures. Pilate could flog a troublesome prophet or dismiss a blasphemy claim or case by the chief priests as pretty insignificant. But he could not ignore a would-be king. Just as Herod demonstrates at the beginning of the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, he too was frightened of someone or something that might be called a king in his place. Would-be kings were political trouble. After these strange times we're living through now, it can never be business as usual. But this is a time for prayer. The quietness of Dulverton and our world just a few weeks ago seems like a distant memory, and it's very easy to get lost as the traffic builds and things are getting back to normal. It's very easy to forget to be quiet, to be still, and to continue to lead a life that's full of meditation and prayer, because that is really what will support our government, our political parties of all shapes and colours, and we need to pray for all of them. And we need a lot of prayer for those who would just sink to the depths of anarchy, that they too might be drawn along with us together in a peaceful and progressive way. Think of those images. Think of our government. Be grateful for the stable society that we do generally have in this country, and pray, and pray, and pray. And then we have that wonderful figurehead in our nation too, our Queen. I'm unashamedly a royalist. I know that many will differ on that with me. But have someone like her, that little lady of such amazing age and years of service, speaking out about her own Christian faith and what the cross really means to her. Amen.